What if I told you that a simple piece of paper in your wallet could begin to change your financial reality? That wealth is not something you chase, but something you invite, something you align with. Inspired by the timeless teachings of Joseph Murphy, this idea is not about luck or struggle, but about the power of your subconscious mind. When you impress the right belief deeply within yourself, your outer world begins to reflect it. Today you will discover how a single, powerful affirmation kept close to you can shift your mindset, reprogram your thinking, and open the door for wealth to start flowing into your life almost immediately. The subconscious mind does not argue, question, or evaluate the way the conscious mind does. It simply accepts what it is repeatedly given and then works tirelessly to express that belief into reality. This is where most people unknowingly shape their financial condition, not through effort alone, but through the silent assumptions they carry every single day. Every thought you repeat, every belief you hold on to, every statement you internally agree with begins to settle into the deeper layers of your mind. And once it is there, it starts operating as a command rather than a suggestion. If a person constantly thinks money is hard to earn or I never have enough, the subconscious mind receives that as a directive, and without hesitation, it begins to organize behavior, perception, and even opportunities in a way that proves this belief to be true. It filters reality so precisely that even when chances for growth appear, they are ignored, dismissed, or sabotaged because they do not match the internal script that has been accepted as truth. In contrast, when a person deliberately introduces a new belief, especially through repetition and emotional conviction, the subconscious begins to rewrite its internal blueprint. It does not matter whether the belief is initially true or not in the external world. What matters is the consistency and intensity with which it is impressed upon the mind. The subconscious does not distinguish between imagination and reality in the way the conscious mind does, which means that vividly imagined wealth, repeatedly affirmed and emotionally felt, begins to take on the same level of acceptance as actual experience. This is why repetition is not just a technique, but a necessity, because a single thought rarely penetrates deeply enough to create change, while repeated thoughts carve pathways that eventually become dominant patterns. Over time, these patterns shape how a person thinks, acts, reacts, and even what they notice in their environment. A person who begins to affirm wealth consistently is not just saying words. They are feeding the subconscious with a new identity, one where abundance is normal, expected, and inevitable. As this identity strengthens, it starts influencing decisions in subtle but powerful ways. Choices that once felt risky begin to feel natural. Opportunities that once seemed invisible become obvious, and actions that once required effort start to feel automatic. The individual is not forcing success, they are aligning with it because the subconscious is now working in harmony with the desired outcome rather than against it. This alignment is what creates the impression of things happening automatically or effortlessly, when in reality it is the result of internal conditioning reaching a point where it overrides old limitations. The key is understanding that the subconscious mind is always active, always listening, and always accepting something, whether you are aware of it or not. If you do not consciously choose what to impress upon it, it will default to the patterns you have absorbed from your environment, your past experiences, and the repeated thoughts you have entertained over time. Many people unknowingly repeat negative financial beliefs inherited from family, society, or personal failures, and because these beliefs are repeated over years, they become deeply rooted, appearing as facts rather than assumptions. Changing this requires deliberate effort, not in the sense of struggle, but in the sense of persistence and consistency. When you begin to introduce a new affirmation, especially one related to wealth, it may initially feel unnatural or even false, because it conflicts with the existing programming. This resistance is not a sign that the affirmation is ineffective. It is evidence that the old belief is still dominant. By continuing to repeat the new belief, you gradually weaken the old pattern and strengthen the new one, much like building a new habit while an old one fades away. The subconscious does not need logic or proof. It needs repetition and emotional reinforcement. When you combine words with feeling, the impact becomes significantly stronger because emotion acts as a signal that tells the subconscious, this is important. Pay attention to this. This is why simply repeating an affirmation mechanically may produce limited results, while repeating it with conviction, imagination, and emotional engagement accelerates the process. The more real the thought feels, the more quickly it is accepted, and once accepted, it begins to express itself through your reality. This expression may come in the form of new ideas, increased confidence, unexpected opportunities, or shifts in behavior that lead to better financial outcomes. What appears to be coincidence is often the result of internal alignment reaching a level where external conditions begin to reflect it. The subconscious mind operates like fertile soil. Whatever you plant and nurture will grow, regardless of whether it is beneficial or harmful. If you plant seeds of doubt, fear, and limitation, those are the results you will harvest. If you plant seeds of confidence, abundance, and certainty, those will eventually manifest as well. The process is neutral, consistent, and always active. This means that the responsibility lies not in controlling every external factor, but in choosing what you repeatedly impress upon your inner world. The power of belief is not in a single moment of inspiration, but in the quiet, persistent repetition that reshapes the foundation of how you see yourself and your possibilities. When you begin to understand this, you realize that wealth is not just a matter of external effort, but of internal agreement. You must first agree at a subconscious level that wealth is possible, natural, and available to you. This agreement is formed through repetition, through the consistent reinforcement of a new idea until it feels familiar, then normal, and eventually undeniable. At that point, the subconscious no longer resists. It supports, guides, and amplifies your actions in a way that aligns with the belief you have chosen to install. Your wallet is something you touch, see, and interact with almost every single day. Yet most people never realize the psychological and subconscious influence it carries. It is not just a place where you store money. It quietly becomes a symbol, a reflection of your financial identity, and a trigger for your beliefs about wealth. For many, the moment they open their wallet, there is an automatic emotional reaction, sometimes subtle, sometimes strong. It might be a feeling of lack, a quick calculation of how little is inside, or even a silent reminder of limitations. These repeated emotional responses, though often unnoticed, are powerful signals being sent directly to the subconscious mind. Each time the wallet is associated with scarcity, it reinforces a belief that there is never enough, that money comes and goes too quickly, or that financial security is always just out of reach. Over time, this association becomes deeply embedded, and the wallet itself turns into a conditioning tool, not for abundance, but for limitation. Now imagine reversing that process intentionally. Instead of allowing your wallet to reinforce scarcity, you transform it into a constant source of wealth conditioning. By placing a carefully chosen affirmation inside it, something you will inevitably see or be aware of repeatedly, you begin to reprogram the emotional and psychological meaning attached to that object. The wallet stops being a passive container and becomes an active instrument of change. Every time you open it, even for a brief moment, you are exposed to a message that contradicts old beliefs and introduces a new one. The power here lies in frequency and proximity. You are not relying on occasional motivation or isolated moments of inspiration. You are embedding a new belief into one of the most frequently accessed areas of your daily life. This repetition, tied to a physical object you already use, creates a natural and effortless loop of reinforcement. The subconscious mind thrives on patterns and associations. When a specific object is consistently paired with a particular thought or feeling, the mind begins to link them together automatically. In this case, your wallet becomes associated with wealth, abundance, and financial flow rather than lack or worry. Even if you do not consciously read the affirmation every single time, the awareness that it is there begins to influence your perception. Gradually, the emotional response you once had starts to shift. Instead of tension or concern, there is a subtle sense of confidence, expectation, or even calm assurance. This emotional shift is critical because the subconscious responds far more strongly to feelings than to words alone. Words introduce the idea, but feelings confirm it as real. What makes this method uniquely effective is that it integrates seamlessly into your existing behavior. You are not adding a complex routine or requiring extra time. You are simply attaching a new input to an old habit. Each time you pay for something, check your cash, or open your wallet for any reason, you are reinforcing the same message. This kind of repetition is far more impactful than something done once or twice a day in isolation because it is spread throughout your routine in a way that feels natural and consistent. Over time, the repetition builds familiarity, and familiarity reduces resistance. What once felt like a hopeful statement begins to feel like a normal thought, and eventually it becomes part of your internal narrative. There's also a deeper psychological layer at work here involving identity. Your wallet is closely tied to how you see yourself financially. It is one of the most personal financial objects you own, something that represents your ability to earn, spend, and manage money. By placing a powerful affirmation inside it, you are not just influencing your thoughts about money, you are influencing how you see yourself in relation to money. You begin to shift from someone who is trying to get by to someone who expects growth, from someone who worries about expenses to someone who anticipates opportunities. This identity shift is subtle but profound because once the subconscious accepts a new identity, it begins to align behavior with it automatically. For example, a person who starts to internalize the idea of being financially abundant may begin to make different choices without even realizing why. They may become more open to opportunities, more confident in negotiations, more willing to invest in themselves, or more disciplined in managing their finances. These changes are not forced. They emerge naturally from the new belief system being installed. The wallet, in this sense, becomes a silent coach, constantly reminding and reinforcing without requiring conscious effort every single time. Another important aspect is the role of attention. The human mind tends to notice what it is conditioned to expect. If you are constantly reinforcing scarcity, your attention will be drawn to bills, expenses, and financial stress. If you begin to reinforce abundance, your attention gradually shifts toward opportunities, solutions, and possibilities. This does not mean that challenges disappear, but it does mean that your perception of them changes. Instead of seeing obstacles as proof of limitation, you begin to see them as temporary situations that can be navigated. The wallet, by consistently presenting a message of wealth, helps guide this shift in attention. There is also a compounding effect that occurs over time. Each exposure to the affirmation may seem small on its own, almost insignificant, but the cumulative impact becomes powerful. Just as negative beliefs are formed through repeated exposure over months or years, positive beliefs can be built in the same way. The difference is that this process is now intentional rather than accidental. You are choosing what to repeat, what to reinforce, and what to associate with your daily experiences. The wallet becomes a central point of this repetition, ensuring that the message is not forgotten or ignored. Consistency is what transforms this from a simple idea into a powerful practice. It is not about how strongly you believe the affirmation at the beginning. It is about how consistently you expose yourself to it. Even if there is doubt initially, the repetition begins to wear it down. The subconscious does not hold on to doubt indefinitely if it is not reinforced. When a new message is introduced repeatedly, especially in a context that is emotionally relevant like money, it gradually takes precedence. The old belief loses its dominance, and the new one begins to guide your perception and behavior. This approach also removes the pressure of trying to feel motivated all the time. Motivation can fluctuate, but conditioning relies on repetition, not intensity. By embedding the affirmation in your wallet, you ensure that the process continues regardless of your mood or circumstances. On days when you feel confident, it reinforces that confidence. On days when you feel uncertain, it provides a subtle reminder that challenges the old narrative. In both cases, the conditioning continues uninterrupted. Over time, the wallet becomes more than just a physical object. It becomes a symbol of your commitment to a new financial reality. It represents a shift from passive thinking to active conditioning, from unconscious habits to deliberate influence. Each interaction with it becomes an opportunity to reinforce a belief that supports your growth rather than limits it. The transformation is not immediate in a dramatic sense, but it is steady, reliable, and deeply rooted. As the subconscious begins to accept the new association, it starts to influence not only how you feel about money, but how you interact with it, how you manage it, and how you attract it into your life. Affirmations are often misunderstood as simple, repetitive phrases that people say in hopes of feeling better, but their true function goes far deeper than surface-level motivation. When used correctly, affirmations act as instructions delivered to the subconscious mind, gradually reshaping the internal patterns that determine how a person perceives, reacts to, and ultimately experiences their financial reality. Every thought that passes through the mind carries a certain level of influence, but thoughts that are repeated with intention begin to solidify into beliefs, and beliefs are what the subconscious treats as truth. Once something is accepted as truth internally, it does not remain confined to the mind. It begins to express itself through behavior, decisions, expectations, and even the kinds of opportunities a person notices or overlooks. This is where affirmations move beyond words and start becoming a mechanism for transformation. The process begins with the understanding that the mind is constantly translating internal dialogue into external experience. A person who repeatedly tells themselves that money is scarce, difficult to obtain, or reserved for others is not just expressing an opinion, they are reinforcing a pattern that shapes their financial outcomes. These patterns influence how they respond to opportunities, how they handle risks, and how they manage resources. Over time, the results they experience appear to confirm their beliefs, creating a feedback loop that strengthens the original thought. Affirmations interrupt this loop by introducing a new pattern, one that deliberately contradicts the limiting belief and replaces it with a more empowering one. The key is not in saying something once or twice, but in repeating it consistently enough that it begins to feel familiar, then acceptable, and eventually true. What makes affirmations particularly powerful is their ability to influence identity. Financial reality is closely tied to how a person sees themselves. If someone identifies as someone who struggles with money, that identity will shape their actions in subtle but persistent ways. They may hesitate to pursue opportunities, undervalue their skills, or avoid situations that require financial confidence. When affirmations are used consistently, they begin to shift this identity. Statements like, "I attract wealth easily," or "money flows to me in expected and unexpected ways," are not just descriptions of a desired outcome. They are declarations of a new self-concept. As this self-concept is reinforced, the subconscious begins to align behavior with it. Actions that once felt uncomfortable start to feel natural, and decisions that once seemed risky begin to feel appropriate. There is also an important neurological aspect to this process. The brain forms pathways based on repeated thoughts and experiences. When a particular thought is repeated frequently, the neural connections associated with it become stronger, making that thought more automatic and more influential. Negative financial beliefs often have strong neural pathways because they have been repeated over long periods of time, sometimes reinforced by external experiences. Affirmations work by creating new pathways. At first, these pathways are weak and require conscious effort to activate. But with repetition, they become stronger and more dominant. Eventually, the new thought pattern begins to replace the old one, not through force, but through consistency. Emotion plays a crucial role in accelerating this process. The subconscious mind responds more quickly to thoughts that are accompanied by feeling because emotion signals importance. When an affirmation is repeated with genuine conviction, even if that conviction is initially small, it carries more weight than a neutral or mechanical repetition. Visualization can enhance this effect by adding sensory detail to the affirmation, making it feel more real and immediate. When a person not only says an affirmation but also imagines what it would feel like for it to be true, they create a stronger impression on the subconscious. This combination of words, repetition, and emotion creates a powerful input that gradually reshapes internal beliefs. Another important factor is consistency across different contexts. Affirmations are most effective when they are not confined to a single moment of the day, but are integrated into various aspects of daily life. This is why placing them in environments that are frequently encountered, such as a wallet, a phone, or a workspace, can significantly increase their impact. Each exposure reinforces the same message, reducing the likelihood that it will be overshadowed by negative or contradictory thoughts. Over time, the repetition becomes so ingrained, the affirmation begins to surface automatically, even without conscious effort. Skepticism is a natural part of this process, especially in the beginning. When a new affirmation contradicts a deeply held belief, the conscious mind may resist it, pointing out reasons why it is not currently true. This resistance does not diminish the effectiveness of the affirmation. It simply reflects the strength of the existing belief. By continuing to repeat the new statement, the balance gradually shifts. The subconscious does not require immediate belief. It requires repeated exposure. As the new thought becomes more familiar, the resistance decreases and the affirmation begins to feel less like a contradiction and more like a possibility. As affirmations take root, their influence extends beyond internal thought patterns and begins to affect external behavior. A person who consistently affirms financial abundance may find themselves becoming more proactive in seeking opportunities, more confident in their interactions, and more disciplined in their financial habits. These changes are not forced. They arise naturally from the new belief system. The subconscious, having accepted the idea of abundance, begins to guide actions that are consistent with that idea. This guidance often appears as intuition, inspiration, or a sense of clarity about what steps to take. There is also a selective attention mechanism at work. The mind tends to focus on information that aligns with its existing beliefs. When a person believes that opportunities are scarce, they are less likely to notice them, even when they are present. When they begin to affirm abundance, their attention gradually shifts. They start to notice possibilities that they previously overlooked, recognize value where they once saw none, and interpret situations in a more constructive way. This shift in perception can have a significant impact on outcomes because it changes how a person interacts with their environment. The transformation created by affirmations is not instantaneous, but it is cumulative. Each repetition adds to the overall impression being formed in the subconscious. Over time, these impressions reach a point where they begin to influence behavior and perception in a consistent and reliable way. The process is similar to the way habits are formed. It requires repetition, consistency, and a willingness to continue even when immediate results are not visible. As the new belief becomes dominant, it begins to shape not only how a person thinks, but how they experience reality. Affirmations also encourage a shift from reactive thinking to intentional thinking. Instead of allowing external circumstances to dictate internal responses, a person begins to choose the thoughts they reinforce. This shift in control is significant because it changes the direction of influence. Rather than being shaped by circumstances, the individual begins to shape their response to those circumstances, which in turn influences the outcomes they experience. The affirmation becomes a tool for maintaining focus on a desired reality, even when external conditions are not yet aligned with it. Over time, the repeated use of affirmations creates a sense of familiarity with the idea of wealth. What once seemed distant or unattainable begins to feel normal and achievable. This sense of normalcy is important because the subconscious tends to resist what feels unfamiliar and accept what feels known. By repeatedly exposing the mind to the concept of abundance, the affirmation reduces the psychological distance between the current state and the desired state. As this distance decreases, the transition from one to the other becomes more natural. The effectiveness of affirmations ultimately depends on persistence. It is not the intensity of a single session that creates change, but the steady accumulation of repeated input over time. Each repetition reinforces the same message, gradually building a new foundation of belief. As this foundation becomes stronger, it begins to support new behaviors, new decisions, and new experiences. The words that were once simply spoken start to manifest as actions, and those actions lead to results that further reinforce the belief. This cycle continues, strengthening itself with each iteration, as the internal and external realities become increasingly aligned with the affirmation that was chosen and consistently repeated. There is a subtle but profound difference between thinking about wealth and feeling wealthy. And it is within that difference that the real shift begins to take place. Most people approach money from a purely intellectual standpoint, focusing on numbers, strategies, and external conditions, yet the subconscious mind responds far more powerfully to emotional states than to logical arguments. A person can repeat the idea of wealth endlessly, but if their dominant feeling is anxiety, lack, or doubt, the subconscious will align with the feeling rather than the words. This is why feeling wealth, even before it visibly exists in your external world, becomes one of the most powerful mechanisms for attracting it. The feeling acts as a signal, a kind of internal confirmation that what you are affirming is not just a distant possibility, but a present reality within your inner experience. When you begin to deliberately cultivate the feeling of wealth, you are essentially teaching your subconscious what to expect as normal. This is not about pretending or denying your current situation, but about choosing a different emotional baseline from which you operate. If your baseline is stress or scarcity, every financial decision and opportunity will be filtered through that lens. If your baseline becomes calm confidence or quiet certainty, your perception begins to shift in ways that are difficult to achieve through logic alone. The subconscious does not require physical proof to accept a state as real. It requires consistent emotional reinforcement. When you feel wealthy, even in small moments, you are planting a seed that gradually grows into a dominant pattern. This process begins with awareness. Most people are not consciously aware of how they feel about money on a moment-to-moment basis. The feeling is often automatic, triggered by habits of thought that have been repeated over years. Bringing attention to this feeling is the first step toward changing it. Once you become aware of a recurring sense of lack or tension, you can begin to interrupt it by introducing a different emotional response. This does not need to be extreme or exaggerated. Even a slight shift toward ease, gratitude, or confidence can begin to alter the pattern. The key is consistency, because the subconscious learns the repetition of emotional states just as it does the repetition of thoughts. One effective way to cultivate the feeling of wealth is through imagination. When you vividly imagine yourself already experiencing financial abundance, you create a temporary emotional state that mirrors that reality. The more detailed and immersive the imagination, the stronger the feeling becomes. You might imagine the freedom of making choices without financial stress, the satisfaction of achieving your goals, or the sense of security that comes from knowing you have more than enough. These imagined experiences are not meaningless. They are practice sessions for your subconscious, allowing it to become familiar with a state that may not yet be fully expressed in your external life. Over time, this familiarity reduces resistance and makes the feeling easier to access. Another important aspect is the way you interpret your current circumstances. Two people can be in similar financial situations, but feel completely different about them. One may focus on what is lacking and feel constant pressure, while the other may focus on what is working and feel a sense of stability or progress. This difference in interpretation creates a different emotional environment, which in turn influences future outcomes. By consciously choosing to interpret situations in a way that supports a feeling of wealth, you begin to shift your internal state regardless of external conditions. This does not mean ignoring challenges, but it does mean refusing to let those challenges define your emotional baseline. The body also plays a role in reinforcing emotional states. The way you carry yourself, your posture, your breathing, and even your tone of voice can influence how you feel internally. When you adopt the physical characteristics of someone who feels confident and secure, you send signals to your subconscious that reinforce that state. This creates a feedback loop where the body supports the emotion, and the emotion supports the belief. Over time, this loop becomes automatic, making it easier to maintain a consistent feeling of wealth without conscious effort. Gratitude is another powerful tool in this process, not because it directly creates wealth, but because it shifts your focus toward what is already present. When you regularly acknowledge what you have, you create a sense of sufficiency that contrasts with the feeling of lack. This sense of sufficiency is closely related to the feeling of wealth because it removes the constant pressure of needing more in order to feel secure. From this state, you are more likely to make decisions that support growth, rather than reacting out of fear or urgency. Gratitude does not replace ambition. It stabilizes your emotional foundation so that ambition can be pursued with clarity rather than stress. It is also important to recognize that the feeling of wealth is not necessarily tied to extravagance or excess. It is more accurately described as a sense of ease, confidence, and trust in your ability to generate and manage resources. This means that you can begin to cultivate it at any level of income or financial status. Waiting for external proof before allowing yourself to feel wealthy creates a delay that keeps the desired state out of reach. By choosing to feel it now, even in small ways, you begin to align your internal state with the outcome you want to experience. As this feeling becomes more consistent, it begins to influence your behavior in subtle but meaningful ways. You may find yourself making decisions with greater confidence, taking calculated risks that you would have avoided before, or recognizing opportunities that previously went unnoticed. These changes are not forced. They arise naturally from the new emotional baseline you have established. The subconscious, having accepted the feeling of wealth as normal, begins to guide actions that are consistent with that state. This guidance often appears as intuition or a sense of knowing what to do next, even if the logical path is not immediately clear. There is also a resilience that comes from maintaining a feeling of wealth. Financial challenges are a normal part of life, but the way you respond to them can vary greatly depending on your internal state. When you feel wealthy, challenges are less likely to trigger panic or self-doubt. Instead, they are approached with a sense of problem-solving and adaptability. This resilience allows you to navigate difficulties more effectively, which in turn supports long-term success. The feeling of wealth acts as a stabilizing force, preventing temporary setbacks from disrupting your overall direction. Over time, the repeated experience of feeling wealthy begins to reshape your identity. You start to see yourself as someone who is capable, resourceful, and aligned with abundance. This identity influences not only your financial decisions, but also how you present yourself to others and how you engage with opportunities. It becomes easier to step into roles or situations that require confidence because your internal state supports that behavior. The shift is gradual, but it becomes increasingly noticeable as the new pattern replaces the old one. The connection between feeling and outcome is not always immediate or obvious, but it is consistent. The subconscious uses emotional states as a reference point for what is considered normal and expected. By repeatedly returning to a feeling of wealth, you are setting a new reference point, one that gradually influences your perception, behavior, and results. The external changes may take time to fully materialize, but the internal shift begins as soon as the feeling is consistently practiced and reinforced.